I am doing wonderful. Things are all good over on the East Coast.
Trying to stay above
Trying to
water.
be. You're
It's
trying to stay
pouring.
above
It's
water.
pouring.
We're trying to get water here, so you're welcome to send some of it back west if you want. But
I'll
yeah,
send it up
it's
there.
that's all right. Yeah, I need to park my car for a couple days anyway, so that's good. But hey, this was actually a subject that you had brought up to me. I thought it was going to be a pretty good one. We're going to talk about employees again, but more importantly, we're going to talk about virtual work and how that was all the rage just a few
Yeah.
almost short months ago, not even years ago. I think even last year they were still talking about how the office is over. Everyone's going to work from home. Life is good. Utopia, utopia, utopia is perfect. And now where are we at?
Yeah, now I think that we're back in topsy-turvy land with everything kind of thrown up in the air, and what's going to happen? What's the end result going to be?
It's yeah. I mean, I already had a home office, so I'm used to working from here anyway. I definitely travel less than I used to, though people are now starting to welcome you back into their offices. I mean, for many, for since what 2020 anyway, people didn't want to see me, especially the folks I work with in healthcare. They could care or couldn't care less. Get it right. Couldn't care less. I actually show up on their doorstep because I become a liability the moment I walk in if I'm carrying something on me in me that I'm not supposed to. But the world has kind of turned around. And you, just before we hit the record button, you brought up a very interesting subject, which was
Yeah, that even Zoom is calling people back to the office at least 2 days a week.
so
So
Zoom, the
it's
place that made how much money on everyone getting out of work, has their people going back
yeah,
to the office.
and they probably were the biggest winner, if there was a winner, but they probably were the biggest winner in the pandemic in getting their services out to the public. And then now it's a completely different story for them. Stock price went into, I think, the 500s, and now it's back down to down to earth. And they're looking at it as we have to do something else now because that was our pandemic bump, as we call it. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, even they're calling their people back for at least 2 days a week, and setting the standard for getting people back into their offices.
Yeah, that seems to be the consistent thing. So while people might not be going back to the office full time, they are being required to at least split time between the office and work from home. And I guess, we should probably kind of backtrack a little bit because, I mean, like I said, this was utopia. This was going to
Yeah.
be the next big thing. I remember in 2020, 2021, articles coming out about how much more productive employees were working from home, how there was no need to go into the office, how this was going to save people, save families thousands, tens of thousands, and save employers because they weren't going to need as much office real estate as they did in the past. I know traveling down to Illinois, I've got some friends down there. I visited economic development outside of Schaumburg, and we were driving by all the high-rise office buildings, and he's like, "Yep, that one's half full. That one's a third full. We're trying to figure out what to do with that one."
Yeah.
And this was this year yet, so this was the beginning of the year. But now we're seeing more and more companies saying, "We need you to come back," and I think that's a different approach than what most people were expecting. Now, what's been your experience out on the East Coast? What are you typically seeing going on now?
Some of the same. I would say it's definitely a lot more driving down the highway and you're looking at that building and you're saying, "Wow, there's nobody in there." Um, but I think everybody has their eye. I'm not that far from New York City, right smack in the middle of Manhattan, and everybody's had their eye on Manhattan because they're sort of a secondary player in this whole conversation, right? And that is
Yep.
that even New York, they call it. I think I read it this morning that they called it, shaky New York City office market. But the other thing that's added on top of that is you have the whole WeWork situation where they were the biggest landlord in Manhattan, and I think
Ah,
he started that whole business in New York.
right.
So now they're talking about that one looking like it's not going to make it. So that's just going to give a whole nother set of, a giant smack to New York City. Um, so I think that that piece is just kind of secondary and not part of our conversation, but it's out there. And, New York's really handle all of this change. I don't think ready for it. They should have been. I think they should have been, because if we want to backtrack it, I mean, people were talking about hoteling and using lighter footprint or smaller footprint for back
Yep.
1997. I moved into a new office building with Price Waterhouse before they merged with Cooper's.
Hmm.
And I found it interesting. They finally figured out your auditors are never here. They're always at the client.
Mm,
So if they're at the client, they don't need a desk here.
right.
So the hoteling part came in and it became, a new way of thinking. And I think that this whole conversation comes down to this just needs to be a new line of thinking. Everybody has to think what's best for my business and how do we get this done. Maybe I don't need 40 floors in Manhattan at some ridiculous amount per square foot, but somewhere along the line, people still have to be able to get together for certain projects or certain tasks.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, knowing how expensive real estate is out in New York, where virtual office should be a boon. It really should, because if you can minimize your office space, I mean, gosh, what you guys are paying for rent out there. I was talking with my father-in-law the other day, and just even a efficiency apartment can go for what, 5 grand a month. 5 grand a month in
Yeah.
Wisconsin buys you a really nice mansion. If you can make it work out here, you'll do just fine. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that was kind of some of where the utopia of virtual office was coming in. Obviously we couldn't go anywhere because of where things were at, health wise. So that's why people were staying at home. And I
Mhm.
do believe early on people were more productive because you didn't have to waste, in most cases, an hour. I don't know how much traveling you were doing when you were going downtown. Um, but
Mhm.
most large cities, just to get anywhere, even relatively close by, takes 45 minutes to an hour to get there. I live out in the
Yeah.
sticks, so for me to get to any city is going to take an hour to get there. You eliminate,
Yeah.
2 hours of your day driving. It seems like that would save a lot of time, and that would make you more productive. Uh, your kids are older. My kids are still I have one still of school age, but I do believe a lot of families did also see more productivity because the kids were home. They didn't have to go to a daycare, which I don't know how
Right.
expensive daycare is in New York City, but I'm pretty sure is quite pricey, and it's not that cheap out here
Yeah.
in the Midwest either. So if you're not having that extra expense, you can justify, even if you're not making more money, as inflation is increasing and everything else, you're still sitting pretty well here. Um, and I think that all worked for a while. It actually worked pretty well.
Mhm.
So my question to you is, what changed? What do you see that changed on your end that all of a sudden people are saying, well, this doesn't really work as well as we thought?
I think okay, I have to be the bad guy self that is coming out of my mouth
Don't
right
worry,
now.
I'll jump in and be the bad
Um,
guy with you in a
I
minute.
I think there's definitely you always have the small subset that will distract. I'll call it distract for what I'm about to say. The there's a certain subset of people who are going to abuse the system. We see it everywhere, right? You saw it with
Right.
PPP loans. We saw it with the employer retention credit. You're seeing all kinds of question marks over where did all this money go and who applied 10,000 times to get 10,000 different checks. And so you still have that kind of subset too of the people who, hey, we'll work from home, and then nobody knows what they're doing because they're actually working two other jobs and they told two other
Mm,
people the same thing. So I think that's where I think we run into a little bit of problem of the employers are looking at it and they're questioning, are my people working? Now, I would probably tell you that 90% of them are working, because 90% of them want the fact that this is great for me. I can get my work
Yes.
done at home. I'm home with my kid. I'm protected with, the family being close. If something happens, I'm here. So the peace of mind that goes into what they have from being able to work at home translates into productivity and what they want to do for you from home, because they want you to allow them to stay home. So now the bad, I look at it as the bad subset is going to kind of disrupt and make it distracting for those people. So the 10% of the bad is going to make it more difficult for the 90% of the good. I'm happy that I'm seeing more people thoughtfully thinking about how to do this rather than just saying Monday morning be in my office. Okay.
Yeah,
That would
let's
be
even
horrible.
pull that up. So, um, here's what we're seeing more articles on right now. This is off SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management. Um, there's definitely a stronger push to bring people back, and I think we're seeing more and more stories, sharing how to do it correctly, or if you're going to split time, how to do it correctly. Didn't mean to cut you off there, but I think you were on to a good point.
No.
Is a lot
Yep.
of, we had to do this, or we were told we had to do this, and then a lot of companies obliged and did what they thought was best, and that led to people staying at home. But most companies are not designed for a virtual workspace. I mean, how
Yep.
you were at Price Waterhouse, and how was that? I mean, did you have to be in the office all the time, or what made it so you had to be in the
Um,
office all the time?
that's a great point. See, I think that Price Waterhouse, I have to give them a lot of credit when they designed that office, designing the hoteling. The hoteling was designed around the audit staff,
Mm,
because the audit staff would be out at the client, having meetings, going through documents, doing their documentation that they had to do for the audit work. I was a tax guy at the time. So the tax return systems were all in the office. So computers were only, I don't know how old they were at that point. I came out of school and we were still carrying around these big box computers. They weren't, laptops like we have now. So by the time we got to, 96, 97, when it became time to build out that office, um, tax guys were still kind of expected to be in their cubicles in their house. So the remote part for that was not as easy to move on to. Eventually it got there. But while I was still there, it was hoteling for the audit staff, because the audit staff were only in the office so often, whether it was for a meeting or, to go over certain, work papers or something to that effect. So they would come in, they'd punch in their code in this little television screen on the wall, which was amazing for 1995, six. And it would assign them a desk, and it would route their phone calls. Their phone extension would be
that
routed to
is
that
really good.
desk for the day. So that was early that was high tech stuff for back then. So like I said, I have to give them credit, but that was what I expect people should be doing at this point, is evaluating, what works and what footprint do I really need, and what technology can I put in to allow people to come in every so often, but then allow them to go and be able to set their own schedule.
So, what's the financial ramifications from this? So, taking approach from the book side of things, how how is virtual office space good versus in person? What do you typically see from a CFO side of things?
Well, I will tell you this. I really hope that WeWork sticks around. um, I thought the concept of WeWork was great, other than the crazy stuff that the old owner did. Sorry, I called it crazy, but I don't know what it was. Luckily, I was just a tenant, so I went in. I had a desk. It was great because I was paying for a desk as opposed to paying for a floor.
Right.
You know, you were able to get a smaller footprint because he rented an entire building and then subbed it out to however many people. So from a fractional economy and a startup and a founder kind of framework, I thought that was great because you can't afford Manhattan when you're a startup.
Right.
You either have to bunk with a friend or, find a desk at a law office where they have an extra. I mean, that was how it was before WeWork. So I'm hoping they stick around because I think that concept still is a fabulous concept that allows you to go and do what you have to do. And you have a place to kind of meet or at least park for the day if you're in the city for the day. It's that kind of concept that I think is a fabulous way to go. Larger companies don't necessarily have the ability to do that very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
especially if they have a 10 or 20-year lease on a half a building, you know, and you tell all your people, hey, don't come to the office. But no, you're paying for that building.
Right.
You're paying for those floors. So you have no way of getting out of that unless your landlord is really feeling like, like it's gift season
Well, I was going to
and he
ask you,
wants
is there
to,
any way you
give you
can
back your.
renegotiate a lease? Is that possible? Or
They have absolutely done it. Because of the pandemic, I know that there's been a lot of conversation among companies that, they do go back to the landlord and say, we can't do this. Can we work something out? And I think a lot of landlords had to come to the table, whether they wanted to or not. I think they had to say, I know this is the business I'm in, but what do I do if he doesn't come back?
right.
You know, what happens if I have 20 floors in an office building that go vacant?
Mm-hmm.
You know, vacancy rates can determine your building's value. I mean, I think real estate values generally run off of what your NOI is. So if you're not taking rent in, your NOI goes through the floor, and then your valuation is trouble. So,
Right.
and then
And
see
for
if you break
those
a
who might
covenant
not
on
be
your loan.
familiar with NOI, what is NOI?
Net operating income. Sorry, I do that every single
Thank you.
time. I throw out the acronym. Thank
I'm
you
here
for
for you,
grabbing
man. I'm
that
here
one.
for you. I'll call you on the
Your
acronyms.
your net operating cost, your rental income minus your net operating costs bring you down to NOI, net operating income. And generally, when you go to somebody to do a valuation on your building, when you're dealing with big commercial real estate, you're not looking at, well, gee, let's see what my EBITDA is. No, they look at your NOI on that one, and they look at a different way, and they look at what's the multiple based on the valuations um, of your operating expenses. Basically, comes down to whether or not that building is worth a certain amount, how you can refinance it. So it's a lot of extra kind of back background scene that I know anybody that I know that it's in real estate, they're really focused um, uh, on that factor or that statistic.
A little bit of a tangent here, but I think it's still worth bringing up. Um, what are you seeing as far as when lease or when not mortgages, but basically your commercial real estate investments come due? I know one of the things that we've been talking about here in the Midwest with a lot of these commercial projects is, they're 5, 7 years out now, which typically is the time when people go in and refinance them or have to refinance
Mhm.
them because they're hitting that balloon payment on their loan.
Yep.
And of
Yep.
course, money was much cheaper 5 years ago than it is today. So some of these projects are not profitable once you start going up to 7, 8% interest, where you were probably at 3 to 4 before
Yep.
that.
Yeah. Seeing the same thing. Seeing the same thing here. It's much more difficult, and the bigger players, you can see that they already anticipate issues,
Mm-hmm.
and they've already gone into because of that valuation formula. They're looking to do anything they can to keep that net operating income up, just to be able to refinance. Let alone the fact that there's, like you said, a higher interest rate, a higher interest factor now. So I have some people that I work with that do high end, renovations for office buildings. So they'll come in for a tenant and they'll basically redo a whole office.
Mm.
And they said it's gone through the floor.
Mm.
The number of projects that they had before and the number of the projects they're getting now, it's completely a different market. So New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, out this way, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that everything's just kind of slowed down because if they don't spend the money, that NOI gets supported that little bit more.
Right.
So they're not giving there much as far as renovation projects, repairs and maintenance. They're keeping those costs as low as they can.
Yep. And we will definitely see that move into the Midwest. And I think for some people who may be looking at real estate or property in the near future, if it is something where you are growing and need more space, this might be a good opportunity coming up in the next 12 to 24 months, either to renegotiate your lease or possibly acquire more property just due to the
Mhm.
valuations.
Yep. Yep.
Now the other
Yeah.
side of this,
If you can
oh,
withstand the interest.
yeah, that's the key. Otherwise, you get investors and find a different way to take a swing at it. The other side of this, though,
Yes.
that I wanted to bring up before we kind of move more to the people side of things is, when it's looking at virtual office, there's still other costs involved. There's technology. Typically, if you're working from home, somebody needs a computer, right? Depending upon
Hmm.
what type of business you're in, you might need a secure network, you might need a server, you might need some other stuff to handle that work from home type situation, especially if you're working with privacy issues, any sort of confidential data that you don't want somebody, when they're at home surfing on computer, checking Facebook or the internet or something and pick up a bug. And now all of a sudden you've compromised all your private information. What are you seeing as the cost that differentiates between work in the office versus work at home?
Well, unfortunately, well, maybe it's fortunate. Uh, I, in my experience, I saw a lot of people that were already somewhat set up. Um, so whether they were in the office or out of the office, the sort of businesses that needed the VPN already had it, like the virtual
Hmm.
private network. So they already had connections that were set up so that whether they were in the office or out of the office, the security feature was already there. And most of them were already working on some degree of a laptop. Even if they went into the office and put it into a docking station or plugged it into the Ethernet cable,
Sure.
they were already connected through the security protocols that were mandated by the company. So smaller companies and whatever industry they were in, some of them, it wasn't maybe as prevalent, but
Hmm.
again, they were still, they still had security features on a laptop and were carrying that with them. And for the most part, if everybody had already got laptops, I didn't see a lot of structural changes that required a lot. I mean, obviously, we were talking about Zoom at the beginning of the conversation and talking about how, they are calling people back to the office, but, Zoom was a big thing for everybody to have their meetings virtually.
Right.
Um, and so, other than software licenses for everybody to have Zoom, I didn't see a lot of hardware expense. I think a lot
Mm.
of people already had hardware integrated into their day-to-day life. So the fact that they were now working from home, the hardware component was already there. It was just a
True.
matter of,
True.
okay, we have to get you moving on some software, or we have to increase security. But that I think is minimal as opposed to buying a full-blown Mac or even a full-blown PC.
Right. Well, I think even your iPhone, your Android, whatever you're using as a phone, world's changed a lot. I mean, I still remember the BlackBerry days when it was pretty cool that you
Yeah,
could get email and keep track of your calendar on one device and didn't need your Palm Pilot or whatever else. Now we're really
yeah.
dating ourselves here,
I
but
love my BlackBerry.
yeah, I did too at the time, but the iPhone did
Yeah,
turn out to be a little bit better.
yeah.
You have so much power in the palm of your hand when it comes to being able to be fully accessible, and I think that's
Mhm.
people don't realize it, but we have, like you had some great insight there. We have been virtual for actually a long time. We just did it in a dual role where we went into the office 5 days a week. And then when we went home, we still got emails, we still got phone calls, we still got meeting requests and all that stuff. And,
Yep.
that's been around for almost 10 years now.
Yeah.
Zoom was probably the biggest new thing. I was already on Zoom at the time, but I know there were a lot of people that didn't even know what Zoom was in 2019. And then all of a sudden, it's kind of like Google. It became its own term by the end of 2021, 2022. Uh, so yeah, you're right. There it wasn't a lot of adjustment, and I didn't really think about that. But yeah, we've already been doing a lot of this stuff for
Yeah.
quite some time. Uh,
Yep.
so that leads into, well, then why didn't this work? Because if we've already been working from home to some degree, Uh, we've already been doing all this stuff. We should have just been able to flip a switch on and you know stay home. But that's not the case here, is it?
I'm not seeing that it's the case. Think to a um, think, I think to a certain extent, it's a control factor. Um, and I think there is a executive control factor of knowing that people are there, knowing that people can be reached, you know where they're at, you know what they're doing. But for me, I'm kind of against that. I think to a certain extent, if I can't trust the employees that I have to do what they're supposed to do, whether they're home or in the office, or if they're not going to pick up the phone, if I have to reach them on something that's important, now that you have not only the phone, you have text, you have email.
Right.
Everybody's got these things. 99% of people have them in their phone, like we were just talking about. So if I can't get them, then I seem to have a problem with one employee. I don't see why I have a problem with all the employees and I have to mandate a factor for the whole office. I'm looking at it as, you know, I need you to get these things done. These are the tasks. Maybe we have to find a better way to lay it out for employees that say, here's how it's going to be done. And I'm sure somebody can chime in here and probably say, we already do that. And that's great. I'm happy to hear that, right? Because I think that's the way to go. I mean, build on what Price Waterhouse, or at least what I saw at Price Waterhouse 20 plus years ago, evolve into what's going on now. And are we really talking about everyone? Because I think, founding companies, smaller companies are all embracing the foundational, or the fractional economy, bringing in people that are here for a little bit of time to do the job I need, but not sitting around at the office saying, what do I do next?
Right.
I think, so
But
I
see,
think there's a,
that I
there's
think
a,
is right where the problem lies, and why people want their employees back in the office. I agree with you on everything there. And the biggest issue that most employers have is
Mhm,
when the employees at home, they don't know what they're doing or how much they're doing or how productive they are. And that to me is
mhm,
why there's this draw to bring people back in the office. The one thing I will disagree with you on is it's very hard to create a workplace culture when everyone is working remotely. And you're right, we are kind of a gig economy now. We don't automatically fill every position. We might go out and find somebody to fill a task or fill a project. Then when that project's done, they go away, they find something else to do. uh, but you still need employees that are there full time, that are productive. And
mhm.
when they're working from home, I know there's some companies, and I've had people tell me, "Oh, yes, you can do this, and you can create a culture and have people work remote." I just don't see it. It's We are social by nature. We are social beings, and if all you're doing is working from your home office, you're pretty well isolated from everything else. And I think that, in my opinion, that's where communication starts to fail. Um, where we did see the wheels fall off the bus when we did all go virtual, when everyone had pretty much had the tools in front of them, but they still couldn't make
Mhm.
it work. And it was because we as a society are not structured to work in isolation. And I don't have any articles here on that, but I do know, I've seen stories or studies where depression has gone up, anxiety's gone up. Certain people that
Mhm.
there are certain employees that definitely want to work from home. There are also others that were demanding to go back to the office themselves because
Yeah.
they just couldn't
Yeah.
handle that isolation. And that kind of gets into where I think the wheels fell off the bus here, because I can't remember if you mentioned it earlier or not, but people were also doing side jobs. So you have an employer paying for 40 hours a week to do work for you, but now they're doing work for somebody else and still collecting 40 hours a week from you. That to me doesn't
Right.
seem fair, because you're making a commitment
No.
to an employer, that employer is making a commitment to you, but now you're using some of your time that you're already being compensated for to do work for somebody else. And that's a pretty
Agreed.
hard adjustment. And to me, that's really what probably pushed most of these companies to start bringing people back. They don't have clear
Mhm.
expectations of employee. They don't understand what productivity is, especially in office jobs. Less true in manufacturing, but the manufacturing people never went home. They had to come
No,
back to the
no.
factories no matter what. It was pretty much all the office
Yep.
staff that got the privilege to work from home and kind of do things how they wanted to. Uh, the other side of the coin, and this is where it gets difficult, is I do agree with you. If somebody's being productive and they're producing, I don't care if they're doing it at midnight. I don't care if they're doing it at 5 a.m. I don't care if they're doing it at noon.
Yep.
And if they've got doctor's appointments or they want to take their kids to the park or whatever, as long as the work's getting done and it's not affecting other people, go ahead, do what you want. Um,
Yep.
but I don't know
Well, I
if,
think it was.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I think it was interesting that I did read one article that was talking about, that, and one of the high levels executives had kind of said, we see the benefit of the people being happy that they were
Mm-hmm.
home. And they said the only thing that they did was they found a way to try to, again, a hybrid method, which is, I'm not against people working from home. I'm not against people going into the office, especially I agree with you on the culture, because I think culture is getting smacked with, with all of the people being out on their own. There is
Yes.
no connection, and it really does have a social aspect to it that becomes difficult on people. And I think people would be a little happier if there were some more face to faces as opposed to, me staring at my Mac, you know. Um, and I think the thing that I read about them was they decided that they weren't going to mandate it back to the office, but what they did mandate was there has to be a certain number of get-togethers where the people did
Mm,
actually still get together. And I think the one company I had read, I'm not even sure it was in the office. I think it was an offsite, but everybody on a team would go to this offsite and meet. That way it was social, it was culture, it was task oriented. It became more about, this is why we do what we do. Maybe a little more than here, do what I say, but a little more of this is why our department needs to work together. And when you're on a Zoom, think about what we did here, because make the Zoom more of the social. Like,
right.
because the rest of the week you're on Zoom, even if it means once or twice a week you have to find a way to do an offsite. At least at that point, you get the benefits of what the people need besides instruction.
Yep. And I do believe leaders need to be taught differently. This is a new world that you're leading in. You have to really look at defining what productivity is. And it's hard to do from an office worker's perspective. Like I said, in a
Yeah.
factory, is how many widgets you hammer out. And for an employee, is how
Yep.
many widgets pass in front of them that complete whatever task they're doing and go on to the next person or next machine. When you're in an office situation as sales or as it's project management or as marketing or something like that, you can only measure the end result. Now, you might say, well, isn't that enough? Well, yes and no, because the end result without a definitive timeline can stretch out weeks, maybe even months. And if you're expecting somebody to be productive and working for you, you really need to find a way to make sure that productivity is measured on at least a weekly basis, and then doing follow up. Because if people do have idle time, they're going to say, well, I don't know what to do next, so I might as well go find something else to do. And if somebody else will pay me to do that, then I can get my work done here, my boss is happy, and then I can do this other project and I'll make more money, and they'll be none the wiser.
Mhm.
But that makes it more difficult
Yeah.
because now you're splitting up your time. And what happens if that second job now requires more time of you, and now you got to cut into more of what the first job is providing?
Right.
Uh, that to me is where really being very clear, um, and coaching people as leaders. We need to do a better job coaching people. Less meetings and less just doing, because that's what I tend to see most bosses do is they are very hands on, or they get involved, or they're completely hands off and they never follow up and never communicate to their staff, and then things run amok either way. Uh, so that's really where leadership styles need to change to where there's regular communication happening, there's accountability, there's follow up. But there's autonomy for that employee. But that employee also understands here's the tasks that are required of you and the timeline that they're required in. Because I'm pretty sure we could probably tighten up some timelines and get more productivity if we are much clearer on what's expected by when.
Right. I understand that. I agree. Um, and that again, just to support your point. That's really hard to do. And I'm acknowledging the fact that it's really hard to do. I mean, I worked in accounting firms for years, and one of the things I didn't like about that was, their understanding of how to increase productivity or how to understand what people were doing was to, you know, put time, almost stopwatches on the computers. So if you were sitting at your computer and you logged in, then you were working. So, you know, that didn't tell me anything because I could log into that computer, go sit in the break room for 8 hours,
Yep.
and
Or
according
come
to
back
you,
every
I'm
five
logged in.
minutes and
So,
move the mouse around just to keep the computer from falling
exact,
asleep.
just to keep it going. So, I mean, these are not the brightest ideas. I don't think they're not. I mean, they still sell them. They still sell the
Right.
stopwatches and stuff. And I'm like, I hope nobody's using that because you can't tell me that people are happy sitting at their computer. They get one phone call and they're off. You know, they're off their chart, and that's how you're judging whether or not they're a good employee or not. It doesn't matter that they took the phone call and saved somebody $50 million in taxes. I mean, you know what I mean? It just becomes that's not really the way I would want to see it run. So that's where I
Right.
kind of push back on people who tell me, no, everybody has to be back in the office. I think of the
Right.
stopwatch. I'm like, that's not that just beats up on what I would argue for culture because I don't
Yeah.
want
And I
people to
wouldn't
think
want
that
an
they're in a
accountant
prison.
doing a stopwatch on my tax return because he may miss something one way or the other. It may work in my benefit now, but then cause an audit later, or other way, he might miss something that should be deducted, and now it isn't, and I'm paying more in taxes. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you definitely don't want people just specifically measured by time. But I do think throughput and being realistic about what that throughput is is a good way to kind of
Yeah.
track it. You should know, for example, I am sure from accounting side of things because I know you've done tax accounting. You know how long processing a tax return takes, and based on the size of the company, number of employees, probably that something like one person shop's going to take this much time versus a 100 employee factory that's got two locations might take more time to work through.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's ways that we can measure that, whether it's in sales or whether that it's in just general administrative or different office tasks. You don't want to be too strict, but at the same point, you should be putting rough requirements of what should be completed by when. And this is really where
Right.
project management comes in, which, again, most companies
Yeah.
really struggle with, is figuring out how to manage workflow through their office, because there's a lot of people that are busy, but they're not productive. And you really have
Right.
to look at things from a productivity standpoint and figure out how to make that happen versus just saying, well, Bob's always at his desk. He always seems to be working on something. And it's like, well, yeah, but what is Bob doing? Is Bob really being productive, or is he sitting there, surfing through Amazon buying stuff when he should be working on something else? Did I lose you?
No, I think you did for a second there, but I'm back.
All right.
That was weird. I thought it froze. I did. I thought it froze. Sorry about
No,
that.
that's all right. That's all right. Uh, so as we're kind of wrapping this up, as I pointed out, we're going to finish this with kind of our take on things. I'll take my turn and go first this time. I think coming back to the office part time, or at least on a hybrid system, is really the way to go. And when it comes down to it, doesn't matter what your environment is, you really need to teach leaders to be better leaders and focus on things like communication, expectations, accountability. They need to be coaching their people, not doing tasks. They need to minimize the number of non-productive meetings that they have, because I think that's another thing that got carried away with the Zoom environment is a lot of people had Zoom meetings, but They didn't necessarily have to be on those Zoom meetings. And I saw that when I was in the office world, that I was scheduled for a lot of meetings throughout the day. 80% of those meetings had virtually nothing to do with me, or at least there was nothing I had to give input on the time I was there. So there's got to be ways to do that
Yeah.
better. And there are more productive ways to produce meetings. But ultimately, if you want to build a successful culture, you do need to get people together, warm bodies in a single space. You can't just have everything online. And I do believe that this move is good, that if you're going back to the office, most people are going to enjoy that more than working from home. At the other side of it, though, you have to be paying employee fair wages. We're going to have to work out things with daycare and whatnot. And as an employer, you're just going to have to look at the needs of the employee and figure out ways to work around maybe a more flexible schedule. Some cases that's easy, other cases that's not. What's your take on it, Rich?
I definitely agree with you. I do see the benefits, especially for culture, to have people getting together. I don't think that some of the ways that I've read it, where it just became mandated, I'm not thinking that's going to be a very good thing for anyone. I think that the hybrid method of bringing people back into, the company that you want to recognize, I think it makes sense to go down that hybrid road. And by the hybrid road, I add to that analyze exactly how your business works. You're the only one who knows how that business should work and how you envision what you want it to be. So, especially in a company that's run by a CEO or a single founder, you know, define what it is that you want the company to look like, what you want the workflow to look like, understand what works, and then translate that to your employees. This is why it has to be. This is why it has to go this way. I will try to work with you so that we get the best of both worlds. However, it has to go this way because, the end result only works if we get to, some degree of working together in person. So you're going to find that some businesses can do it. They can do everything virtual and it's all great. But there's a lot of businesses that really can't and they're still suffering and the actual penalties haven't come out yet. I think that the penalties will, sometimes it takes longer for things like that to kind of come through and show itself that this was a problem for that particular company. So I'm hoping that people take the time to actually sit down and say, the hybrid method will work if we do X and communicate that. The biggest piece of this is the communication down to the people that you want to actually do it and why you're asking them to do it.
Exactly. I also think from the virtual side of things or the hybrid side of things, one thing you definitely need to look at is there a time when everyone needs to be in the office? Because right now, I think what they're doing is saying, well, you have to be in the office 2 days a week, for example, but you can pick the 2 days a week you want to be in the office. Well, that works if you're kind of solo on projects and stuff like that. But what if you're working with somebody else and they choose to be in the office on Thursday and you're choosing to be there on Tuesday? So we're going to have to figure out what's the blend. So it's not just hybrid between work from home and work in the office. It's also going to be hybrid between work in the office when you want and work in the office when you need. And I think
Mhm.
that's probably going to be the biggest challenge for a lot of companies to figure out is the logistics between how to keep people productive and working from home and working in the office and managing all that functionality.
Yep. I agree. I agree with that 100%.
Well, good. We're in agreement. Nothing wrong with that. So this
Nothing
is
at all. Nothing at all.
nothing at all. And this is our what's pretty much the end of our episode for Books and the Biz. And we are checking out today. But before we do that, Rich, how can they get a hold of you?
Best way to reach me is by email, rveltri@veltrigroup.com.
All right.
And
You
Dan?
you can get a hold of me at danpaulsonletsgo.com. You'll find a form to fill out. Feel free to reach out, set up an appointment. Be happy to talk with you. You should also be sure if you're watching us on YouTube, like, subscribe, click the notifications. If you're watching us on other sort of format, come to YouTube or find our podcast, Books in the Biz. And we would love to have you listen to some other episodes that we've got coming up, and also some episodes that we've already recorded. Believe it or not, Rich, we're almost 10 in. So we've been doing this
Wow.
for a couple months now, and it seems to be working for the most part.
Nice. Seems to be
We're
good. I
figuring
love
it
these
out. We're
conversations.
figuring it out. So this has been Books in the Biz. We will be sure to talk to you next week. Thank you and take care.
All right. See ya.